For decades, you were told one thing over and over until it became gospel. Buying a home is the safest investment you will ever make. Your parents believed it. Their parents believed it. Financial advisors built entire retirement plans around it. But here, in 2026, that so-called safe haven is quietly turning into one of the most dangerous financial traps of our generation. Prices on the surface look stable. Some markets even look like they're still climbing. But underneath that calm exterior, the foundation has already cracked. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain and show you exactly why the reality of the housing market is nothing like the story you've been sold. Let's start with the myth that refuses to die, the idea that a house is a safe asset. On paper, it sounds reasonable. Real estate historically appreciates, it's tangible, you can live in it while it grows in value. But nobody ever shows you the other side of that ledger. When you actually add up what it costs to own a home in 2026, the math stops looking like an investment and starts looking like a slow bleed. Property taxes have climbed in almost every major metro area, often outpacing inflation itself. Insurance premiums, especially in states hit by climate volatility, have doubled or even tripled in the last few years alone. Maintenance costs, labor, materials, every single line item has gotten more expensive. And then there's the elephant in the room: interest rates. If you bought before the low rate era ended, you're sitting on a golden handcuff, too afraid to sell because your next mortgage would cost twice as much. And if you're buying now, you're financing a home at rates that quietly eat away any theoretical appreciation before it even shows up in your net worth. Add it all up, and here's the uncomfortable truth. For a huge number of homeowners, the cash going out the door every single month is now greater than any realistic gain in the home's value. You're not building wealth. You're funding a very expensive place to sleep and calling it an investment because that's what you were told to call it. But the cost side is only half the story. The other half is even more unsettling because it's not about what a house costs, it's about who's actually left to buy it. For a healthy housing market to function, you need a steady pipeline of buyers moving up the ladder, first-time buyers stepping in as older generations sell or pass their homes down. But that pipeline is drying up in real time. We've talked before about the slow disappearance of the middle class, and nowhere is that erosion more visible than right here. Wages have crawled forward a few percentage points a year, while home prices have doubled, in some regions tripled, over the last decade and a half. The math simply does not connect anymore. A starter home in most cities now requires an income that used to be considered upper middle class just to qualify for the mortgage, let alone save for the down payment. Meanwhile, an entire generation is renting well into their 30s and 40s, not because they don't want to buy, but because the door has been quietly shut in their faces. So ask yourself the question that nobody in the real estate industry wants you to ask out loud. If fewer and fewer people can actually afford to buy your house, what is it really worth? A price is not real until someone pays it. And when the pool of qualified buyers keeps shrinking every single year, you have to wonder whether today's valuations are measuring genuine demand or just measuring the last transaction before the music stopped. Which brings us to why 2026 specifically feels like the point where all of this stops being theoretical and starts becoming a reckoning. For close to 15 years, the entire global economy ran on what people casually call cheap money. Interest rates near zero, credit flowing freely, and an entire generation of buyers, investors, and institutions built their strategies around debt being nearly free. That era is over. And when the cost of borrowing changes that dramatically, it doesn't just affect new buyers, it ripples through every layer of the system. Adjustable rate mortgages written years ago are resetting at levels that are straining household budgets. Investors who scooped up properties during the low rate years using leverage are now facing refinancing walls, moments where they either have to sell or absorb payments that no longer pencil out. We've talked before about how bubbles rarely burst in one dramatic moment. They deflate first through denial, then through forced selling, and only then through the price correction everyone insists could never happen. If you map out the timeline, the signs line up almost perfectly with previous credit cycles: a boom fueled by easy debt, a plateau where everyone insists this time is different, and then the slow unwind that begins exactly when refinancing costs collide with stagnant incomes. That collision point isn't some distant future scenario. It's happening right now in 2026, in mortgage resets, in regional bank balance sheets, in the growing inventory of homes quietly sitting on the market longer than they have in years. Now, here is where a lot of channels would tell you to panic, to sell everything, to brace for some kind of collapse. That's not what this is about. Panic is not a strategy, and fear-based content rarely leads to good decisions. What this actually calls for is something much simpler and much more powerful: a complete reassessment of the assumptions you've been operating under. If you've been treating your home purely as an investment vehicle, it's worth separating that emotional and financial equation. A home can absolutely be a wonderful place to build a life, raise a family, put down roots. But that's a lifestyle decision, not necessarily a wealth building one, especially in a market where carrying costs are eating the gains before they ever materialize. If you're a buyer sitting on the sidelines feeling like you're missing out, understand that the pressure to buy right now in this exact environment may be exactly the trap the previous decade set for you. Missing a top is not a tragedy, missing a collapse is a gift. And if you're already a homeowner, this is the moment to look honestly at your numbers, your rate, your taxes, your insurance, your maintenance reserve, and ask whether the story you've been telling yourself about your home's value still holds up under real scrutiny, or whether it was built on assumptions from a completely different economic era. Here's the core idea to take away from everything we've covered today. The housing market didn't fail overnight, and it's not going to unwind overnight either. What we're watching is a slow motion correction of a story that was told for too long without being questioned. That concrete and drywall are automatically safer than every other asset class, regardless of price, regardless of debt levels, regardless of who's actually left to buy. That story is cracking in 2026, not because of some single dramatic event, but because the underlying pressures we just walked through, rising costs, a shrinking buyer pool, and the end of cheap credit, have all converged at the exact same moment. Recognizing that isn't pessimism, it's simply seeing the picture clearly instead of through the lens of decades-old assumptions. So the real question becomes, if the old playbook of just buy a house, it always goes up, no longer holds the way it used to, where does capital actually go when the ground beneath it stops being solid? That's exactly what we're going to break down next. The places smart money is quietly moving toward while everyone else is still arguing about whether the housing market is really in trouble. Make sure you're subscribed, because in the next video, we're going to map out precisely where capital flows once concrete stops being king. Stay sharp, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next one.